The city of Seoul seemed to have dressed up for the occasion that night, as if the sky itself were waiting for a grand event. Inside the capital's most luxurious ballroom, lights hung like cascades of gold over an impeccably lined crowd, where every smile was strategically calculated and every toast carried more than just good intentions. Businessmen, socialites, and heirs mingled under the same roof, surrounded by flashing lights, champagne flutes, and a dense air of power and ostentation. Nothing there was simple, and absolutely everything had a purpose: to show off, impress, and exclude anyone who dared to deviate. And it was into this unforgiving landscape that Eun-Ji appeared. She wore a simple dress, bought with months of hard work and savings, believing that perhaps just for one night she could be seen beyond her modest background. As she entered, her steps were measured, her posture withdrawn, as if she knew she was trespassing into territory where she was not welcome. Still, there was a sparkle in her eyes, not the reflection of the expensive jewelry around her, but the courageous gleam of someone who still dreams, even knowing the world around her was built to crush those who dream too much. But when the strap of her dress caught on the gold border of a luxurious decoration and the fabric ripped as she entered, the room fell silent as if in court, and the laughter began. It was the kind of laughter that doesn't amuse. It hurts, ridicules, scars. Cell phones appeared like arrows pointed at her, ready to turn her pain into cruel entertainment. Yet among so many faces distorted by mockery, one gaze remained intact, firm, watching in silence. And it was from that moment, a nearly invisible moment, that history began to change. What no one knew was that the man behind that gaze was about to stop the mockery and change Eun-Ji's fate forever. If this scene has already touched you, subscribe now and continue following every twist and turn of this story. Enjoy the video and get ready, because the best is yet to come. Long before that night, before the torn dress and the cruel laughter, Eun-Ji's life was already marked by silent battles no one could ever recognize. Born in Busan, she grew up in a simple wooden house where the walls held memories of effort and sacrifice. Her parents had passed away too soon, leaving her in the care of her grandmother, a woman with calloused hands who carried in her gaze the firmness of someone who faced life without ever giving in. It was from her that Eun-Ji learned to appreciate every small gesture, every achievement, every plate of rice placed on the table after a long day of work. In that modest, unassuming home, her first dreams also emerged. As a child, she would sit on the floor beside her grandmother, sewing together scraps of fabric she found at the local market. The sound of the needle piercing the cloth was soft music to her, and she would imaginatively sketch dresses in old notebooks. Her grandmother managed to save from neighboring schools. While other girls dreamed of expensive toys, Eun-Ji dreamed of seeing her creations come to life, imagining one day dressing someone important with what her simple hands had created. But life, merciless, was never kind. As a teenager, he worked odd jobs, delivering food, serving grocers, and helping in laundromats. His spare time was spent at the cafeteria, where he still served hurried customers and, between trays, sketched on napkins the clothes he saw in the magazines left on the tables. His fingers, often scarred by exhaustion, were living proof that to survive, dreaming wasn't enough. You had to resist. Despite this, Eun-Ji never stopped believing. She guarded her sketches like someone guarding secrets, as if afraid the world might mock something so precious. At night, beside her grandmother, she would gaze at the distant lights of the big city and say in a low voice, "One day, I will show that my place isn't just serving coffee, but creating something no one can ignore." Her grandmother smiled, even tiredly, and always replied in the same way, "You hold in your hands a gift many would envy. All that's left is for the world to see." And it was this silent faith that led her, almost improbably, to the party in Seoul. It wasn't just an opportunity to attend an event, but a chance to breathe, even if only for one night, the same air as those who dictated fashion and power. When she decided to wear that simple outfit, she believed her dignity would be enough to protect her from comparisons. She never imagined that what she considered courage would become a source of scorn for others. As Eun-Ji recalled her journey, she felt deep down that each step she had taken thus far carried more weight than any cruel laughter she heard. She was a reflection of the resilience of many like her, invisible to society, but filled with strength in their silence. And without even realizing it, the eyes that watched her at that party saw more than a torn dress or a misplaced girl. I saw the whole story hidden behind that tired yet incredibly resilient expression. What Eun-Ji didn't know was that in a matter of moments, that same gaze would cease to be merely observant and become the guiding thread of a destiny that would forever change her life. Because in that room, someone far more powerful than she could have imagined was already preparing to cross the border that separated two worlds. While laughter still echoed through the hall and cameras continued to record Eun-Ji's embarrassment, an imposing figure silently crossed the room. Park Ji-Hoon, CEO of the powerful conglomerate Han Group, was one of those men whose presence never went unnoticed. It wasn't just the elegance of his perfectly tailored suit or the impeccable cut of his black hair that drew attention, but the aura of authority that seemed to accompany him with every step. The guests followed him with their eyes, as if his mere presence could determine the course of the evening. Unlike the others, Ji-Hoon didn't seek the spotlight, nor did he seem interested in the flattery heaped upon him. His gaze was fixed in only one direction, and that was the young woman everyone was mocking. He observed her with restrained intensity, as if trying to decipher something much greater than the scene unfolding before him. Every gesture Eun-Ji made, every tremor in her hands, every tear in her eyes didn't go unnoticed. To him, she wasn't a stranger. She was an enigma suddenly impossible to ignore. Despite the distance, her image seemed to bring him closer to memories he'd long since buried. Her silent courage in facing cruel gazes reminded him of times when he'd also had to prove his worth to a ruthless elite. Perhaps that was what kept him standing still, watching without joining the chorus of contempt that filled the party. There was a spark of recognition there, as if he saw in Eun-Ji the same strength he'd once needed too. Summoned to conquer the empire he now ruled. Some guests, noticing his attention, tried to strike up a conversation, but were quickly ignored. Ji-Hoon maintained a serious, almost unreadable expression as he took in every detail. The difference was that, unlike the others, he didn't see a torn dress as a reason for mockery, but as a cruel symbol of the invisible boundary that separated the powerful from the humble. With each passing moment, his decision was silently formed. He would not simply be a spectator to this cruelty, but he would not act rashly. The right moment had not yet arrived. The scene needed to fully expose the arrogance of those who considered themselves untouchable, so that his intervention would carry the weight of an inevitable shock. Eun-Ji, without realizing it, had already become the center of his attention. As she struggled to stay standing, Ji-Hoon slowly approached, as if the entire room were merely a stage for what was about to unfold. The ambient music seemed to fade away in the face of the invisible tension that hung in the air. But fate, always cruel in its tests, would have one more blow in store before allowing Ji-Hoon's voice to be heard. Because just when everyone thought the humiliation had reached its limit, something even more painful was about to happen before everyone's eyes. The hall was already filled with a heavy atmosphere where the elite's easy laughter had turned into a spectacle of cruelty. Every glance cast at Eun-Ji was an invisible blade, cutting through her dignity before everyone's eyes. She still tried to hold her shoulders, hiding the tear in her dress with trembling hands, but the audience seemed to revel in her struggle to maintain a modicum of dignity. It was at that moment that a group of socialites, known for setting trends in magazines and at events, decided to turn the situation into a veritable mockery. One of them, dressed in a sparkling red outfit and jewelry that reflected every ray of light, approached with a venomous smile. Feigning kindness, she placed her hand on Eun-Ji's shoulder and, in a tone audible to everyone, murmured, "Oh dear, don't worry. Some clothes really weren't made for people who weren't born to wear them." The room erupted in renewed laughter. Eun-Ji felt her chest tighten, as if gasping for air, but remained silent, trying to resist the urge to flee. Another guest, seizing the opportunity, raised her wine glass and, with a calculated gesture, let the red liquid drip onto her already torn dress. The fabric absorbed the stain like an open wound, and the collective shock quickly turned to mockery. "Now yes, it fits perfectly," said the woman, delivering the comment to the audience, who responded with even louder laughter. Cell phone cameras captured every detail, and social media was flooded with videos and sarcastic comments in real time. For those present, it was just another night of fun at the expense of someone considered inferior. For Eun-Ji, however, it was the height of a pain she could no longer bear. Her eyes welled up, but she refused to let the tears fall. Her pride was her last barrier, and even though it was torn apart, she didn't want to concede this victory to those who humiliated her. Meanwhile, Park Ji-Hoon continued to watch. His gaze, previously restrained, began to harden. His fingers, previously resting on the crystal flute he held, tightened around the glass, as if holding back a volcano about to erupt. He knew the language of power well and understood that in such an environment, only forceful action would silence the crowd. Eun-Ji's silence, which to some seemed like weakness, to Ji-Hoon revealed a rare strength. The courage to remain steadfast in the face of public humiliation was something few could muster, and it was precisely this that brought him ever closer to the decision that would change not only that night, but the course of both their lives. Eun-Ji, panting, looked around. The faces surrounding her held no compassion, only contempt. She felt alone, abandoned amidst the luxury that had never been hers. But at the back of the room, a presence was moving. Ji-Hoon, until then discreet, took the first step toward her. The sound of his shoes echoed across the marble, firm, imposing, like muffled thunder announcing the arrival of something grand. Gradually, the conversations quieted. Everyone sensed something unusual was about to happen. The young CEO's figure strode across the Zin room with the authority of someone who didn't need to ask permission to assert himself. Eyes, previously focused on derision, now turned to him, trying to decipher the significance of his approach. Eun-Ji, still clutching the stained dress, looked up and for the first time realized someone was looking at her differently. There wasn't contempt in Ji-Hoon, but something enigmatic, something she didn't dare interpret. And as silence spread through the room like an unexpected wave, everyone waited to see what would happen next, because Park Ji-Hoon's next move would not only change the course of that night, but also challenge the cruel logic of an elite that believed itself above all. The room, previously filled with hubbub and laughter, fell into an unexpected silence as Park Ji-Hoon stopped in front of Eun-Ji. His steps had been firm, measured, but the way he rested his gaze on her was unlike anything anyone there could have imagined. There was no judgment in his eyes, nor pity. Instead, there was an almost solemn seriousness, as if he were about to right a wrong committed by everyone else. Eun-Ji, confused, took a step back. She felt small before the imposing presence of this man everyone revered, but whom she barely knew. The weight of being watched by so many people, coupled with the uncertainty of his intentions, made her heart race. And yet, there was something about his presence that conveyed security, as if he were a wall between her and the world's contempt. Then, without a word, Ji-Hoon removed his jacket. The gesture, seemingly simple, held a grandeur that no one there could deny. With precise movements, he placed the garment over Eun-Ji's shoulders, covering the tear and stains that had become the target of his humiliation. A murmur of surprise ran through the room, as if everyone had witnessed something impossible. "She's nobody to you," said a voice among the socialites, trying to maintain superiority. Ji-Hoon, however, looked up and replied, firmly, in a tone that brooked no dispute, "She is my special guest, and she deserves respect." The statement, direct and indisputable, fell upon everyone like a thunderbolt. The silence that followed was more deafening than any previous laughter. No one dared laugh, no one dared argue. The sheer authority contained in those words made even the most arrogant lower their eyes in embarrassment. Eun-Ji, protected by the heavy, luxurious jacket, felt her body shiver. She couldn't tell if it was from the shame of still being the center of attention or the unexpected protection of someone so powerful. Her teary eyes met his for a moment, and in that brief contact held an unspoken promise that she would no longer be alone. The cameras, which had previously been recording her humiliation, now captured a completely different scene. The most influential man in the room had positioned himself next to the girl everyone had tried to crush. And suddenly, the looks that had previously been filled with derision were filled with curiosity, perhaps even fear. Ji-Hoon lightly grabbed Eun-Ji's arm and led her into the hall, clearing a space between the guests. No one dared block his path. The simple touch of authority in his gestures commanded absolute respect. Eun-Ji, still shaken, followed in silence, but felt each step as if it were a cry against those who had scorned her. The buzz gradually returned, now transformed into whispers. Questions arose among the guests. Who was that girl? Why? Was Ji-Hoon defending her? Speculation was rife, but no one dared approach. The room, which had previously seemed to crush her, now bowed before the force of a single action. As they advanced, Eun-Ji could barely comprehend what was happening. The weight of the jacket on her shoulders was more than fabric. It was a shield, a symbol of something greater. Ji-Hoon hadn't just defended her. He had rewritten in front of everyone the meaning of power and respect. And although that night had started out as the most shameful episode of her life, Eun-Ji had no idea that what had just happened was just the beginning of an even deeper transformation. Because behind that defensive gesture lurked a decision that would completely change the course of her days. And the next step, unexpected and irrevocable, would be the beginning of a new journey she never would have dared imagine. The awkward silence of the room still echoed when Park Ji-Hoon led Eun-Ji to one of the more private reception areas. There, away from prying cameras and judgmental eyes, the atmosphere seemed completely different, as if the outside world had faded into obscurity. Eun-Ji, her heart racing, didn't know whether to thank him, apologize, or simply shut up and disappear. Her lips trembled, but no words would come out. Ji-Hoon, however, didn't seem willing to let her wallow in her own shame. In a firm yet curiously soft voice, he asked her what she was doing at an event like that. Eun-Ji hesitantly explained that she had received the invitation through a friend from the coffee shop where she worked. She simply wanted to observe, dream a little, and perhaps get inspired by the outfits she would see that night. As he spoke, his eyes shone with a sincerity rarely seen in anyone. It was at that moment that Ji-Hoon noticed something no one else in the room could see. On the nearby table, Eun-Ji had dropped a small folder of sketches she always carried with her. Opening it, he revealed drawings brimming with sensitivity, firm lines, and creative ideas. that seemed to leap from the paper. Ji-Hoon slowly flipped through the pages, analyzing every detail as if he were confronted with a precious discovery. "You drew this?" he asked, looking up in genuine surprise. Eun-Ji, embarrassed, nodded. She explained that she spent entire nights designing dresses, even though she couldn't afford to formally study them. The humble tone in her voice contrasted with the grandeur of her revealed talent. And in that moment, Ji-Hoon saw in her more than a victim of humiliation. He saw a potential creator, someone capable of transforming pain into art. Without hesitation, he declared he would give her a chance. He said he needed creative assistance on his design team and that he believed Eun-Ji's talent deserved to be honed. The young woman, startled, immediately backed away. How could she believe that a man like him, the owner of empires, would actually want to invest in someone so insignificant in the eyes of society? But Ji-Hoon held firm to his every word, reminding her that true worth isn't measured by surname or wealth, but by the ability to see beyond the visible. Eun-Ji felt tears well up, this time not of shame, but of hope. The weight of the jacket on her shoulders seemed to transform into a blanket of possibilities, as if, for the first time, someone had opened a door that had always been locked. Still confused, but unable to refuse the opportunity offered to her, Eun-Ji accepted the invitation. She wasn't sure what the future held, but the flame she had lit in that moment was impossible to extinguish. And while Ji-Hoon walked away to attend to other party obligations, Eun-Ji remained there, hugging her drawing folder, feeling that her world, until then restricted to a coffee shop and hidden dreams, was about to expand in a way she could never have predicted. What she didn't yet imagine was that this opportunity, born from a gesture of compassion, would not only change her professional life, but also awaken feelings that would challenge all the barriers imposed by society. The days following Ji-Hoon's invitation marked a profound change in Eun-Ji's routine. For the first time, she walked the halls of one of Seoul's most imposing buildings, not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged there, albeit shyly and insecurely. The weight of suspicious glances was constant, and whispers about her presence seemed to follow her footsteps. But there was something different. Now she had a space where she could express her passion and, above all, she knew she wasn't completely alone. Ji-Hoon, even with commitments that demanded his attention, found time to observe the young woman and notice details others overlooked. During their first lunches in the company cafeteria, he chose to sit next to her, ignoring the executive's surprised reactions. He asked about her grandmother, her childhood in Busan, and the drawings she kept in old notebooks, and each answer revealed a delicacy that contrasted with the cold world of business. Eun-Ji, initially shy, began to speak with more confidence, feeling that every word was listened to with genuine interest. In the design room, the meetings became even more meaningful. Eun-Ji nervously presented her sketches, and Ji-Hoon observed with the attention of someone who recognizes a talent that could not remain hidden. He didn't limit himself to complimenting her, but offered advice, encouragement, and showed his belief in her future. Small gestures, like holding the door for her to pass through or discreetly supporting her hand when he saw her feeling unsure, carried a silent strength that Eun-Ji didn't dare name, but that transformed her days. The glances exchanged in moments of silence became frequent. There were no declarations, but the bond between them was woven into every detail, like an invisible thread that grew stronger with each encounter. Still, Eun-Ji struggled with the fear of being just a burden and questioned how much she could resist the pressure of the outside world. What she didn't know is that, while she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with him, dark forces were already moving to transform that hope into a storm. Because where there is true love, there is always envy ready to rise. The closeness between Eun-Ji and Park Ji-Hoon soon drew hostile glances. In the elegant surroundings of the Han group, where every step was watched, whispers rose like poison in the air. Some said she was taking advantage of his kindness. Others insinuated that her presence tarnished the company's reputation. And, as always, nothing stayed confined to the hallways. Rumors quickly penetrated the glass walls and reached the outside world. It was at this point that Ji-Hoon's ex-fiancée decided to act. A beautiful, influential woman of the elite, she refused to accept being replaced by someone she deemed unworthy. She used her position and connections to fuel gossip, making Eun-Ji a target of the press and social media. Vicious headlines featured phrases like, "Who is the mysterious poor girl who charmed the Han heir?" or "Opportunism disguised as romance." Within the company, hostility intensified. Eun-Ji, as she walked through the hallways, felt accusatory gazes follow her like shadows. Whispered comments made her shrug, but she remained silent, determined not to give in to those who wanted to see her fall. At night, however, when she arrived home, the tears finally found their way. Only in front of her grandmother could she reveal the weight she carried, and even then, she tried to hide it so as not to worry her. The height of cruelty occurred at a fashion event hosted by the Han group. In front of reporters and cameras, Ji-Yeon approached her with a calculated smile and said loudly, "It's amazing how some people know how to infiltrate. Will the next step be marrying a CEO?" Laughter echoed through the room, cutting through Eun-Ji like invisible blades. Ji-Hoon intervened, pushing Ji-Yeon away and imposing silence, but the wound was already open. For the first time, Eun-Ji began to believe that no matter how hard she fought, she would never be accepted in this world. And it was in this whirlwind of looks, rumors, and insults that an idea began to form in her mind. Perhaps the only way to protect him was to disappear. The weeks that followed were a succession of dark days for Eun-Ji. The glimmer of hope that Park Ji-Hoon had ignited in her life began to fade under the weight of gossip, hostile looks, and cruel news that spread like wildfire. Every time she opened her phone, she found comments that stabbed like invisible daggers. Gold digger, opportunist, an unworthy shadow beside him. Social media turned his name into a joke, and the company's hallways were no longer just cold, but stifling, as if every step echoed the collective judgment. Eun-Ji still tried to maintain her composure around Ji-Hoon. When he appeared, she forced a smile, talked about her drawings, and demonstrated dedication to her work. But inside, she was broken. Each night, sitting in front of her grandmother, she wondered if she really had the right to continue on this path. The woman, even without understanding all the details, sensed the weight on her granddaughter's soul. She touched her hand and offered words of comfort, but Eun-Ji didn't have the courage to reveal the gravity of the situation. The breaking point came one rainy morning. Upon arriving at the office, he found an anonymous envelope on his desk. Inside were newspaper clippings with vicious headlines and a single sentence written in red letters. "If you really care about him, go away." The impact was devastating. For the first time, Eun-Ji wept not out of shame, but out of resignation. He felt those words were more than a threat. They reflected the cruel truth he refused to admit. That night, in her cramped room, Eun-Ji wrote a letter. Each word was wrenched from her heart with pain. She explained that she could no longer be by his side, that the respect and admiration she felt could not become a burden to his reputation. She ended with a sentence that bled into her soul. "You deserve someone from your world, not a girl like me." She folded the paper with trembling hands and left it on the desk in the office where Ji-Hoon often passed by. Then, heartbroken, she packed her few things into a small suitcase and left without looking back. The year city, illuminated by neon lights, seemed to mock her decision, but Eun-Ji believed she was making the only sacrifice capable of protecting the man who had given her so much. The next morning, Ji-Hoon entered his office and found the letter. Upon reading it, his face hardened. Disbelief took over first, then anger, and finally the profound pain of losing something barely earned. He immediately set out to find her, calling contacts, searching cafes and wandering the streets, but Eun-Ji seemed to have dissolved into thin air. Each failed attempt deepened the emptiness within him. The days that followed were torment. Ji-Hoon fulfilled his duties as CEO, but his mind always wandered to the same memory. Eun-Ji's gaze, the drawings tucked away in his briefcase, the shy way she smiled when he complimented her. Her absence was an open wound, and nothing seemed able to heal it. Meanwhile, Eun-Ji sought refuge in a remote neighborhood, trying to remain anonymous. She worked odd jobs and avoided any contact that might reveal her whereabouts. But each night was marked by longing, by the weight of having abandoned not only an opportunity, but a blossoming feeling she would never again have the courage to acknowledge. Ji-Hoon silently swore to himself that this wouldn't be the end of the story. And though he didn't yet know how, he promised he would find a way to prove to everyone, and especially to her, that love isn't measured by conventions, but by the courage to face them. Fate, however, had already set the stage for this reunion, and when the moment finally arrived, it wouldn't be in silence or anonymity, but in front of everyone, where no lies could hide. The Han Group's annual fashion show had been meticulously planned to impress, bringing together the business elite, influential journalists, and renowned critics in a hall illuminated by spotlights that transformed every detail into a spectacle. The runway gleamed under the incessant camera flashes. The models showcased luxurious pieces, and the fascinated audience murmured compliments that mingled with the captivating orchestral soundtrack. For many, it would be just another ostentatious fashion event, but for Park Ji-Hoon, who carried Eun-Ji's absence like an open wound, that night would be the moment to tear apart conventions and reveal the truth he had kept hidden. Ever since he found the farewell letter, he had wandered the streets of Busan and the alleys of Seoul in search of it, asking acquaintances, revisiting unlikely places, but each time what he found was only emptiness and frustration. The pain of loss, however, hadn't been enough to erase his resolve, and that was why he had decided that if Eun-Ji couldn't be by his side in secret, then he would make the whole world know he loved her. As the performance reached its climax, Ji-Hoon rose from the front row, and the hall fell into a suspicious silence, as if sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. He walked to the stage, took the microphone, and, with the calm of someone unafraid of judgment, declared that this night would not be remembered solely for the clothes presented, but for the value of something much greater: truth. The giant screen behind him lit up, revealing simple yet intense sketches created by Eun-Ji's hand. The audience reacted with murmurs of surprise, recognizing the authenticity that shone from each line. Ji-Hoon then looked up and declared that those drawings belonged to the woman everyone had tried to humiliate, but that it was she who had taught him that true luxury was not wealth, but respect. The silence that followed was heavy as lead, until he unhesitatingly stated that he loved Kang Eun-Ji and wouldn't be ashamed to declare it in front of everyone. Across town, in a small apartment, Eun-Ji watched the scene on television, her hands trembling and tears streaming down her face, incredulous that someone would defy the world for her. And it was at that moment that everyone understood that the story could not end there, because Eun-Ji's answer was still to come. The hall still vibrated with the intensity of Park Ji-Hoon's declaration, and the charged atmosphere seemed suspended between astonishment and emotion. Every guest, every journalist, and every gaze fixed on the stage recognized that they had witnessed something irreversible. But the true answer had not yet been given. It was then that the main doors slowly opened, and to everyone's surprise, Eun-Ji emerged. There were no luxurious dresses, no elaborate makeup. She wore only the simplicity that had always accompanied her, and over her shoulders was the same jacket Ji-Hoon had placed on her on the night of her humiliation, a living symbol of the courage he had demonstrated. A murmur ran through the audience, but no one dared repeat the earlier jeers. Eun-Ji walked hesitantly, her heart racing, but with a firm resolve not to run away. Ji-Hoon, seeing her, advanced toward her, heedless of the flashes and stares. When they finally met, he extended his hand, and Eun-Ji, still trembling, accepted the gesture. The silence in the room turned to anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for the outcome of a story that seemed to have come straight out of a fairy tale. Together they took the stage. Ji-Hoon took the microphone again, but there was no need for long speeches. With a voice thick with emotion, he declared that Eun-Ji was the reason he believed in a different future, and that he would never allow her to be humiliated again. He then knelt before her, not only as a gesture of love, but as a challenge to the elite watching them. Eun-Ji, unable to hold back her tears, also knelt, and through sobs, replied that she would no longer run away if she was still desired by his side. The hall erupted in applause, and even the most incredulous faces bowed before the strength of that union. The stage, once dedicated to fashion, had become a makeshift altar, consecrating not only a romance, but the victory of respect over arrogance. And as the applause echoed, a new promise was silently formed. That story had not yet come to an end, because their love needed to be told in time and in the small gestures of the future. Time passed, and Eun-Ji and Park Ji-Hoon's life found a new rhythm, far from the voices that once tried to separate them. On a quiet morning, the small house where they now lived breathed peace. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the simple, yet warm room. Eun-Ji, sitting at a worn wooden table, taught her daughter how to handle a needle and thread with an almost ritualistic delicacy. The girl, with attentive eyes and a concentrated expression, followed her mother's every gesture, as if embroidery were a sacred secret passed down from generation to generation. "Never be ashamed of who you are," Eun-Ji said, her voice laced with tenderness. "The most valuable fabric in life is not the most expensive, but the one sewn with respect and love." The child smiled innocently, as if those words were treasures stored in his small memory. Ji-Hoon, standing at the door with a still warm cup of coffee in his hands, watched the scene with teary eyes, as if there, in that silent, intimate moment, lay the answer to all the questions that had once tormented him. He thought of the nights they'd faced scorn, the times his choice had been treated as weakness, the looks he'd tried to ignore, the comments he'd had to swallow silently, and felt an almost sacred relief in realizing that resisting had been worth it. The room where they now lived lacked gleaming marble or international works of art, but the warmth of the walls they had painted themselves, the scent of the flowers planted in the backyard, and the laughter of their daughter running barefoot among the furniture gave their home a value not everyone could see. They were no longer surrounded by photographers, cameras, or social conventions, but they were finally free, and that was all that mattered. The difficulties, it's true, didn't disappear completely. Life still presented obstacles like any other lived truthfully. But now, each challenge they faced was sustained by the certainty that they were side by side. When fear knocked on the door, it was the memory of the battle won that strengthened them. When doubt threatened to enter, it was the love built with patience that reminded them of their purpose. What once seemed impossible became a daily life full of meanings that only they knew, and that was more valuable than any inheritance or important surname. When Eun-Ji looked up and saw Ji-Hoon smiling silently, she knew that the promise made that night, when he took off his jacket and walked her down the aisle, wasn't just a nice gesture in front of others, but a lifelong decision. They had defied expectations, resisted shame, faced prejudice, and built, brick by brick, a new way to win. Not by imposing their story on the world, but by living it. Truthfully, until the world had no choice but to respect them. If this story touched your heart, leave a like now, share it with someone who needs to believe in true love, and subscribe to the channel to follow other stories that move, inspire, and transform the way we see life.